The indicator on the x-axis is income per person. In other words, it is the gross domestic product of the country divided by the total population and adjusted for differences in purchasing power. In this video, I will refer to it as GDP. The indicator on the y-axis is child mortality, the number of deaths of children under 5 years of age per 1,000 live births. This indicator is greatly affected by the mother and child's access to clean water, healthcare, sanitation, food, and their general standard of living. I've chosen these two indicators because they both indicate the economic development of countries. GDP per capita is a financial measure, while the child mortality is a health measure. Moreover, the two indicators are correlated between each other by the fact that if the people from a country have a stable income, if they are not in extreme poverty, earning more than 1.25 US dollars per day, then they will have more access to healthcare and resources to maintain a good sanitation, good nutrition, and an overall good standard of living. This will lead to healthier mothers and healthier babies, hence a low child mortality rate. Furthermore, if people have low incomes, then they will have fewer resources to maintain good sanitation and nutrition, and the child mortality rate will be higher. The first graph shows the development of these two indicators in Turkmenistan from 1800 till 2012. From 1800 until 1916, there was generally an increase in the income with small fluctuations. So in this part, there was generally an increase in income. From 1916, 1917 to 1918, there was a substantial decrease in the GDP. So from here to here, this is 1918. The cause may be a violent uprising that broke out in 1916 when the Turkmen fought the Russians in an attempt to obtain their independence. The Turkmen defeated the Russians and established a national government that lasted until 1918. The altering of Turkmenistan's relationship with Russia may have had a big impact on Turkmenistan's exports, leading to a decrease in GDP. Starting with 1922, the GDP starts to increase once again as the USSR regained its control over Turkmenistan and on the country's economy. So from here it starts to increase once again. From 1939 until around 1946, there is another slight decrease in the GDP, which is around here. This is the period of time in which World War II took place. The USSR suffered many losses in terms of factories, farms, and cities in Western Russia because of the fighting. USSR's financial losses most probably affected negatively the economy of Turkmenistan, who was part of the Soviet Union at that time. From 1946, the GDP rises once again as the USSR recovers from the war. So it starts to increase once again. New plants are built in Central Asian cities, including in two Turkmen cities. As a result, new jobs are created and so more incomes, both having a positive effect on the GDP. During the 1970s, the Soviet government developed the region's energy resources, including oil and natural gas. These investments most probably had a positive effect on the GDP, adding more job opportunities. So this is all in this part. There is an increase, constant increase. From 1978, the GDP starts to decrease once again. It starts to decrease once again, with more substantial changes between 1991 and 1997. So in this part, there is a more substantial decrease in GDP. This was the period of transition for Turkmenistan. On October 27, 1991, Turkmenistan proclaimed its independence from the USSR, and as an independent state, Turkmenistan couldn't depend financially anymore on Russia, and this could have been one of the reasons for the drop in GDP. Between 1991 and 1998, Turkmenistan's economic activity dropped 45%. Until 1992, the gas production used to account for almost 60% GDP. However, because of the fact that trading partners did not make payments and due to the fact that Russia refused to allow Turkmenistan gas transportation through its territory, the output was reduced by more than 40%. This led to a decline in overall industrial production and debts. In 1998, the GDP started to increase slightly, probably due to the fact that the value of total exports had risen sharply because of increases in international oil and gas prices. So around here it starts to increase once again. Turkmenistan continued to suffer from the lack of adequate export routes for natural gas and from debt. In spite of the slight rise in GDP that can be seen on the graph, the economic prospects in the near future are discouraging because of widespread internal poverty and the burden of foreign debt. The second indicator, child mortality, has a continuous decrease over the years with the exceptions of the year 1969 when it slightly increased here. The reason may be that in 1969 there were local outbreaks and sporadic cases of cholera that affected infants as well as adults. The situation soon got better and the child mortality rate continued to decrease. In spite of the overall decrease, the child mortality rate is still high compared to developed countries. This is mainly related to the fact that 50% of the population in Turkmenistan lives below the poverty line, having a low standard of living. The second graph illustrates the progress of the two indicators in Suriname between the same period of time, 1800 and 2012. Between 1800 and 1924, the child mortality varied almost insignificantly. Then, starting with 1924, the rate decreased with each year. So it started to decrease. There are no substantial differences from one year to the other. The decrease, starting with 1924, may be the result of the abolishment of slavery in 1863. People who used to be slaves started to be paid for their work. Furthermore, in 1916, the American Company of America began mining bauxite, which gradually became Suriname's main export. These two main events contributed to both the economic development and the economic growth of Suriname. Moreover, the positive effects were seen after some years as an improved standard of living with a lower child mortality rate. The two events had also a positive effect on the GDP as the units of output per person increased. As it can be seen in the graph, around 1978, the GDP decreased and there was a period of fluctuations between 1978 and 1990. So in this period of time, there are fluctuations. During these years, there was political turbulence in Suriname that most probably had a negative effect on the economy. The event that had the biggest impact on Suriname's economy took place in 1982 when the Netherlands, Suriname's largest benefactor, stopped giving financial aid to the military group that had taken power by force and was ruling the country. The absence of the Dutch aid led to economic deterioration. However, after the return to a more or less democratically elected government in 1991, Dutch aid resumed. In 1992, the economic situation seemed to be slightly better due to the fact that the program aiming at economic stabilization through improved tax collection, removal of certain government subsidies, and the harmonization of exchange rates was successful in controlling the increased inflation. In 1997, the Dutch government suspended once again the aid given after Suriname refused to hand over the army chief of Suriname accused in the Netherlands on drug charges. The inconsistency of the Dutch aid may have determined fluctuations in the GDP. From 2000, so around here, from 2000, the GDP raised once again, and the reason may be the fact that a new government was established since that year and it managed to achieve a level of macroeconomic stability. The third graph illustrates the progress of the two indicators in New Zealand. As it may be seen in the graph, around 1853, the child mortality rate decreased. This may be related to the fact that this year held more peaceful relations between New Zealand government and indigenous Maori. The fact that there weren't frequent armed conflicts assured the fact that families remained intact. The loss of a parent, and especially the father who supported financially the family, could have put the mother and her child in a difficult situation. The possible lack of money could have led to the lack of food, the deterioration of the health of the child, and finally to the death of the infant. More peaceful times helped avoid this kind of situations. From 1862 to 1863, there is a sharp increase in the child mortality rate. From here to here. This may have happened due to the fact that the peak of the hostilities in the New Zealand Wars took place in 1863. Over the course of the two major campaigns, the lives of about 1,800 Maori and 800 Europeans were lost. These casualties among the soldiers of both sides made many families to suffer financially, and as mentioned before, this could have affected the well-being of the young children. The wars lasted until 1872, and as seen in the graph, there are fluctuations in the rate over this amount of time. So in this part, there are fluctuations. In 1907, there is another significant increase in the mortality rate. 1907 over here. There was no notable event such as a disease or an armed conflict taking place in this year that could have explained this increase. However, Dr. Sir Frederick Truby King establishes a society that provides specially trained nurses to advise and assist New Zealand mothers free of charge. This most probably helped to decrease the child mortality rate as more health care was offered to women and their children. The positive results may be seen in the graph as the mortality rate started to decrease once again. Furthermore, in 1918, a lethal influenza pandemic struck New Zealand between October and December 1918. Here, if we go to 1918, so it may be seen the increase in the child mortality rate. In 2 months, New Zealand lost about half as many people to influenza as it had lost during the First World War. Among the people affected, there were children as well. The increase in the child mortality rate may be observed here. The second indicator, income per person, the GDP, generally grows over the years. However, it can be clearly seen that around the 1930s, the GDP decreased. In the early 1930s, New Zealand experienced the Great Depression, which was probably the cause of the drop in GDP. Exports fell by 45% in 2 years, national income by 40% in 3. At the worst point of the depression, the number of unemployed may have exceeded 70,000. New Zealand started to recover from the depression around 1935. In 1967, there is another small decrease in the GDP that may have happened because at the end of 1966, the price of wool fell dramatically by around 40% as synthetic fiber replaced wool. So, around here, there is actually a decrease in income. The entire sheep industry was undermined. Therefore, the income of the people working in this domain had a lot to suffer. Furthermore, the change in the price of wool had a substantial impact on the economy of New Zealand due to the fact that this material used to be the country's #1 export. In order to recover economically, New Zealand diversified its markets. For example, it started to produce pharmaceuticals derived from milk, fractions, and offal. This most probably helped the GDP recover, as it can be seen here.